Hello everyone. This video is all about Captain Jean-Luc Picard and how he is, not so much as a captain, but more how he is as a people person, as a mentor, a manager, okay? And it's inspired by this quote, okay, no substitute for holding the reins. So that's what this video is going to be, okay, an analysis of the command style of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. So I'm not looking at Picard as a diplomat or a tactician. Okay, we know that he's an accomplished diplomat, he's an accomplished tactician, he's, well, with the exception of Nemesis, where they fly through that giant green nebula that makes them lose all communication with Starfleet. But generally speaking, Picard is accomplished in these areas. But I'm going to look at how he performs as a people manager through the study of his senior officers, okay, how his most experienced command crew behaves. And I'm going to be taking an in-universe perspective here, okay. So yes, I know that Star Trek is a TV show. I know that they do certain things because it's on television every week. But I'm looking at this as though we're in the universe of the Next Generation. So imagine, if you will, okay, this is like the court-martial of Captain Picard, okay, because we know that commanding officers are court-martialed following the loss of the starship, right? In the episode The Battle, we know that the Stargazer is lost, okay, and then in the second season episode, Measure of a Man, one of the best episodes that the Next Generation ever did, we know and we are told that commanding officers are court-martialed when their ship is lost. So we can assume that Picard was similarly court-martialed when the Enterprise D was destroyed towards the second half of Star Trek Generations. Okay, we know that the Enterprise was destroyed at Veridian 3, and although we never saw it on screen, we can assume that Picard was court-martialed following the loss of the Enterprise D. And I just want to foreground all of this by saying that I love TNG. I grew up with TNG. I love the characters. I love the majority of the stories. I mean, until you get into sort of season 7 and you have, Beverly Pork's a space ghost and all that kind of thing. But generally speaking, TNG was my Star Trek, my era. I mean, when I was a kid, my mum made me the jumpsuit, She bought the pattern and made me the jumpsuit. It was amazing. TNG was the Star Trek that I grew up with. So I'm not slagging it off. I'm not having a go at TNG here. I'm just exploring some ideas, because now that all of Star Trek is on Netflix, you watch it back and you watch it back as a grown-up, and things look different when you're a little older, So that's what this is about. I also just want to acknowledge my precedents, okay, my influences here, my forebears, because there are plenty of them out there, particularly on YouTube. For example, the almost unsurpassed Plinkett analyses, particularly of the TNG movies, right? You might only have seen Plinkett review the Star Wars movies, and if you've only seen the Star Wars prequel reviews, right, check out the TNG movie reviews. I think the Generations one was the first one Plinkett ever did, and they're spot on. I mean, okay, I have some issues with this First Contact one because I love First Contact more than anything in the world. It's my favourite film ever, but the rest of them, Insurrection, Generations and Nemesis, the analyses are spot on. There's also Steve Shive's analysis of Captain Jellicoe, and Steve Shives does this great video where he talks about the episode's chain of command where Jellicoe takes over command of the Enterprise. And it's really good. I mean, I'm going to get into Jellicoe a little bit later on, particularly from the point of view of Commander Riker, but you really ought to check out Steve Shives' videos. I thought he just did Star Trek stuff. Turns out Steve Shive does loads of things. He does like stuff on atheism and feminism and all kinds of things. But I'd only ever seen his Star Trek material, so I was quite surprised to find the range of stuff that he does. There's also the Lore Reloaded analyses, and if you've not checked those out, you should. Particularly the alternate history things that he does. There's one that he does where he investigates what would have happened if the Dominion had won the Dominion War and what the aftermath would have been. And they're great, like they're really interesting, well researched, well thought out, well presented. So, and then also the Junk Ball Media retrospectives and the series that started off as the therapy series, particularly looking at things like, the evolution of the Enterprise and the Enterprise D and stuff. And again, so fabulously well researched. And I mean, I'm hoping not to tread on anyone's toes here with this video. I just want to kind of add to the discussion, if you like. So I'm hoping that this doesn't come across as me trying to rip anybody off, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to say, I have things to say about Star Trek. I want to join in. So I'll put the links to these things down in the description, and you can check them out at your leisure. So let's start with the man himself, okay? This is a little bit of an introduction to Captain Jean-Luc Picard, okay? The guy that we are here to talk about. So, Jean-Luc Picard was promoted to the captain of the Stargazer in 2333. And this was a position that he held for 22 years, okay? Now, it's established in the episode Tapestry. That's the one where Picard dies and he meets Q in what he thinks is the afterlife, and they go back to when he was at Starbase Earhart, and he ends up in the blue uniform at the end because he avoids the fight with the Nausicaan and stuff, and he learns that although he was a tearaway in his youth, that was actually a good thing because it turned him into the man that he would later become, the captain of the Enterprise. But we know from that episode that Picard takes command of the Stargazer when the captain and first officer are killed, and it's established in one of the novels, I think it's somewhere on Memory Beta, that Picard was the flight officer. He was the helmsman, I think, of the Stargazer at that point. Now, Memory Alpha, and I mean, if you've not heard of Memory Alpha, come on, where have you been, right? Memory Alpha is the resource for Star Trek on the web, okay? But Memory Alpha speculates that Picard wasn't promoted directly to captain. They suggest that he might have been promoted to first officer at some stage in between. And this is to do with the fact that when Riker, not so much when he immediately comes aboard, but when they get to Farpoint Station and Picard and Riker have that exchange in the observation lounge where Picard says, I'm not a family man, Riker. Starfleet's given me a ship with children aboard, and so on and so on. And they get on to talking about the fact that Picard says that Riker wouldn't let Captain De Soto beam down to a planet. And Riker says, you were a first officer, you know what it's like, right? You've got to protect the captain's life. So this suggests that Picard was a first officer at some point, right? It makes sense. However, I mean, I tend to think that Riker was just lazy. I think at this point in Riker's career, he was just cocky. And he didn't do his homework. I don't even think he could be bothered to Google his new captain before he came aboard. I think he was so cocksure that he came on board thinking, this is a doddle, I've been a first officer before. Besides the fact that Riker's assignment to the Enterprise D was, if anything, a sideways promotion, right? He wasn't being promoted to captain. He went from commander to commander. And then he held the post of executive officer of the Enterprise, both Enterprise D and Enterprise E, for 15 years. 15 years he was in the same job, in a pseudo-military organisation where you're expected to progress, right? So that's what I think happened. I don't think that Picard was ever a first officer. I think he was made directly captain from being the helmsman, and I think Riker was just lazy. I think he couldn't be bothered to do his homework before he started his new job, because that's the kind of guy he was in those days. We also know, again, from the first season episode The Battle, that there was a 9-year gap between Picard losing the Stargazer and him assuming the command of the Enterprise, right? There's this long gap between. And again, Memory Alpha gives this example of, I think it's the 4th season episode called Legacy. It's the one where they meet Tasha's sister, Ishara, on that planet, and she comes aboard and everyone's like reminiscing about how great Tasha was, and the audience is scratching their heads going, who cares? Tasha was really dull. Like, no one's interested that Tasha isn't around anymore. But Picard says to Ishara, he tells her how he met Tasha, and he says there was this emergency on a planet, and Picard's ship arrived, and so did Tasha's ship. Tasha was serving on another ship, and he met her on the planet, and she was, I don't know, doing some emergency stuff, whatever. But the point is that Memory Alpha makes this point that it seems to be that Picard commanded another ship in between the loss of the Stargazer and the Enterprise, because there's no way that Tasha would have been, like, she wasn't old enough to have graduated from Starfleet whilst Picard was still commanding the Stargazer, right? She wouldn't have graduated the academy. She probably wouldn't have even graduated high school, right, by that point or something. And again, Memory Beta, which if you've not heard of Memory Beta is the resource for non-canon stuff on the web. So like books and comics and all that sort of thing, right? Memory Beta suggests that in one of the novels, it's the Lost Age novels, that the ship that's been referred to in the episode Legacy was the USS Portia, and that's Portia named for the Shakespeare character, not a Porsche, right? This is not the USS Midlife Crisis Mobile. And the Portia was a Miranda-class ship that ironically looked the same as the USS Saratoga, not the one from Star Trek 4 that got, obliterated by the whales. The whale probe. It wasn't the whales. The whales didn't neutralise anything. It was the probe that neutralised the Saratoga in Star Trek 4. But the Saratoga from Emissary, the one that Captain Sisko served on as first officer. So anyway, the point of all of this is that by the time Picard takes command of the Enterprise in 2364, he has been a captain for at least 25 years, right? At the very least 25 years. And he's commanded 2 ships, probably, before he takes command of the Enterprise. It also seems unlikely that Picard was never offered promotion during those 25 years, right? And the reason I say this is that Starfleet likes to promote their captains while they're still relatively young. If we look at examples from the show, right, people like Nechayev, Admiral Brackett, all right, she was the one who told Picard that Spock was on Romulus, right, in unification. Admiral Ross, he doesn't look that much older than Picard, if he is at all. I would say Ross is younger than Picard. Admiral Kennelly, he was the guy in Ensign Ro, the one with the Cardassian virus that ordered Ro to go to the Enterprise and blame the Bajorans for things that they didn't do. And of course, Admiral Janeway, right? All these people look younger than Picard, okay? I mean, even if you look at admirals like Admiral Pressman, the one from the Pegasus, Admiral Todman, the one who told Sisko not to go in the Gamma Quadrant after Odo when they go with the Romulan Cardassian fleet to wipe out the Founders. Admiral Layton, the guy who's trying to militarize the Starfleet in Paradise Lost and Homefront, right? They all look about Picard's age, if not a little bit younger. So we can conclude from this that Starfleet likes to promote their captains. Well, they're still relatively young, probably younger than Picard when he takes command of the Enterprise. We actually also see Picard being offered the promotion in Next Generation as well, okay? In Season 1, Admiral Quinn offers Picard promotion to Admiral as Commandant of Starfleet Academy. Commandant of Starfleet Academy even. I wrote that, I can't even read it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that Picard's been offered promotion to Admiral at least once. Probably more than that, but he's turned it down. So what we can conclude about Picard as a character here is that he loves being a captain. He thinks being a captain is great, okay? And this is basically shown to us in the Season 2 episode, The Icarus Factor, right? The one where Riker's dad turns up. And he's supposed to be, some ridiculous reason, like he's supposed to be a mission specialist and he's supposed to be helping Riker, because Riker's offered the USS Ares, right? That's not the one from Axanar, a different USS Ares. And Riker's dad is supposed to be there to give him vital information about this mission. And I don't think he ever does. I don't think we ever see Riker's dad tell Riker anything useful about this mission that he's supposedly going on. All we get is just angst and stuff. And then they go and do that like gladiator style thing where they beat each other with big sticks. Anyway, during that episode, Riker's sort of umming and ahhing about whether or not he should take command of the Ares, right? He's like, I don't know if I'm ready, I don't know if I want to leave the Enterprise because all my friends are here, whatever. And Picard pulls him into his office, and he does this thing where he sort of puts his fingers to his lips, like it's a big secret, it's a dirty little secret, and he says, there really is no substitute for holding the reins. There's no substitute for holding the reins. That's how Jean-Luc Picard views being a captain, holding the reins. Right? Now, this is the worst possible advice you could give someone like Commander Riker, right? So, although he comes on the ship all full of piss and vinegar at the start of Encounter at Farpoint, by the time this episode rolls around in Season 2, Riker has got so little self-confidence left that he just passes up one opportunity after another, right? Don't forget, in Best of Both Worlds, he's offered the Melbourne as well. Alright, now the fact that he turned that down turned out to be quite a bonus because it got blown up by the Borg. But in that same episode, he's saying to Troy, I don't know, am I too comfortable here as first officer? What do I do? I don't know if I want to be a captain anymore. And this is the same Riker that left Deanna Troi for his career, right? He was supposed to meet Councillor Troi on Risa, and he stood her up because he got promoted to lieutenant or something. Right? So this guy was so career-minded until he got to the Enterprise, and then something fundamentally changed in Commander Riker's character, and he became like this delicate little sunshine ray that couldn't make up his mind about whether or not he wanted to be a captain. So saying there's no substitute for holding the reins is the worst thing you could say to Riker, because it just panics him. But that's how Picard viewed being a captain. Right, he loves being the captain most in the entire world, okay? In addition, he trains his entire command crew to behave exactly the same way he does, right? Picard likes to stay in the same job. He likes to do the same thing over and over again, and he trains his entire command crew to behave in exactly the same way. And we can see this in two ways. Firstly, almost all of his senior officers have the same jobs for at least 15 years, right? And the worst offender here is Data, right? Data goes 15 years without a promotion. He's a lieutenant commander when he comes on the show. He's a lieutenant commander when he blows himself up in one of the worst scenes in one of the worst films ever made. He's the Harry Kim of Next Generation. People go on about Harry Kim not getting a promotion. What about Data? Harry Kim only didn't get promoted for 7 years, right? Data didn't get promoted for twice that length of time. After the episode Redemption, where Data commands the Sutherland, right, he should have been made a captain there and then. But no, he has to go back to being Picard's secretary, right? This is the worst thing with Data. It's unfair. The other way that we can see this happening with Picard's command crew is that his officers are so used to him being in command, they can't function when he's not there. Picard trains his officers to be so dependent on him being around, and Picard's way of doing things, that when he's not on the ship, his officers fall apart. They just cannot think, they can't conceive of any other way of doing things other than Picard's. And a great case study of this is what I've already mentioned, Steve Shive's analysis of Captain Jellicoe, right? I agree 100% with what Steve Shive says in that video, right? Because it explores this very point, that while Picard is not on the ship, Picard's command crew just don't know how to function at all. They just fall apart. So, in order to discuss this in a bit more detail, I'm going to analyse some examples of where Picard wasn't in command of the Enterprise, right? He's either off the ship or he's, in at least one case, he's just not on the bridge. It's not that he's not on the ship, he's just not there in the same room as his senior officers, right? And I'm going to explore how his senior officers handle Picard not being around, okay? And my ultimate thesis here in this video is that Picard basically doesn't train his officers to succeed in their careers and become captains in their own right, or to go further in their careers, whatever their careers happen to be. He only trains his officers to help him. He wants to stay a captain, and so he trains his senior officers to make sure that happens. You know, he coddles them. He makes them feel so comfortable that they never want to leave the Enterprise. Case in point, Commander Riker. He's so comfortable he never wants to leave. So the officers that I'm going to consider here, all right, are obviously Commander Riker, all right, Dr. Crusher, Councillor Troy, and Commander Data, all right, because all of these officers have significant episodes or periods of time where they're in command of the Enterprise while Picard is either off the ship or indeed off the bridge. Now, that's not every example of an officer in command of the Enterprise. Picard's not there. There's a couple of honourable mentions here. If we consider Geordi LaForge in the first season episode Arsenal of Freedom, okay, this is an example where Picard, in a truly reckless fashion, beams down to a planet and takes almost every senior officer on the ship with him, right? So that's Riker, Dr. Crusher, Lieutenant Yar, Data, okay, they're all down on the planet, and it's the one where they've got the flying drones and they're coming after them, and they get progressively more aggressive and they have to blow them up. And it's all automatic, and it's a war that happened thousands of years ago, but the thing's still active. Very typical first season Next Gen episode, right? Anyway, Picard beams down, taking all the senior officers with him, and he leaves Geordi inexplicably in command, right? The thing is, right, Geordi does a great job. He separates the ship and gets the civilians out of the way, which is something that Picard never liked to do. Picard liked to go into battle with children on board. He loved it. He never separated the ship, right? Geordi does, separates the ship, gets the civilians out of the way, goes back with the battle section. He beats the drones, he saves the day, and he saves the crew, right? Now, we can discount this example quite early on because it is a very early season 1 episode. Picard hasn't wrapped himself in cotton wool on the Enterprise just yet. And also, first season Geordi is a very different character to second season Geordi onwards, right? Geordi from season 2 onwards becomes a completely different character, and he becomes a horrible character. You know, you watch it back, like, later. Geordi LaForge is like an awful person. And the worst example of this, right, when they beam Scotty up, you know, from the Dyson Sphere, there's a scene where Picard has to pull Geordi into his ready room and says, look, could you be nice to that confused old man? He basically has to tell Geordi to show Scotty basic human kindness. Right, and alright, yeah, Scotty's being a little bit annoying, but come on. Why couldn't Geordi just be a little nicer to him? It's like, oh, I've got work to do. I'm like, oh yeah, because Picard's really going to kick your backside if you've not realigned whatever stupid thing you were supposed to be realigning in an hour or whatever. Like, you've got a living legend on your ship, the guy that literally wrote the book on warp drive, and you're treating him like he's some kind of annoyance. Geordi's not a nice guy. This is the guy who recreates people on the holodeck and then spends time with them and says, oh my god, you're beautiful. Like, I mean, people go on about Barclay for making replicas of people on the holodeck. At least Barclay wasn't creepy with it. Barclay was just looking for some escapism. LaForge was looking for a date. Right? He's a weird guy. Anyway, forget Geordi. Right? I'm going to talk about Geordi LaForge. The other honourable mention is Worf in the second season episode The Emissary, right? The one where the Klingons from the 23rd century have just woken up and they're trying to blow up the Enterprise, right? But Worf manages to convince them not to blow up the Enterprise. He averts a war with the Klingon Empire until he basically starts one later on in Deep Space Nine by not going with Gowron to Cardassia. And of course, we know that Worf eventually goes on to command the Defiant. Very well. You know, Worf does a great job commanding the Defiant. And this is because if you compare Sisko with Picard, right, Sisko believes in promoting his crew. And if you look at Deep Space Nine, almost everyone in Deep Space Nine gets promoted, right? Dax starts off as a lieutenant. She ends up a lieutenant commander. Julian starts off as a junior grade lieutenant. He gets promoted to full lieutenant halfway through the series. Even frickin' Nog gets made an ensign. I think Chief O'Brien he goes from chief petty officer to chief warrant officer or something like that. So like everyone, including Sisko himself, gets a promotion on Deep Space Nine. If Sisko had been like Picard, right, you know when Worf comes to Deep Space Nine, Sisko wouldn't have said, I know what we can do with you. Let's put you back on the command track and make your strategic operations guy. No. If Sisko had been Picard, Worf would have taken over from Eddington and he'd have been head of station security. Another example, right? When Worf comes on board the Enterprise in First Contact, the first thing Picard does is he says, Mr. Worf, we could use some help at tactical. He puts him back where he used to work, right? He doesn't say, hang on, Worf, you're a strategic operations guy now. Let's use that knowledge to fight the Borg. No, get back behind the button for the firing the torpedoes. That's all you're good for. If Worf had been in a different position on the Enterprise, I think it probably would have given Picard a psychotic episode. And he's already having problems in First Contact because he can hear the Borg in his brain. Right? The guy just does not like change at all. He hates it. So I'm ignoring Worf, right? Because that's why. So, without further ado, let's assume that this is Picard's court-martial following the laws of the Enterprise D, right? The Enterprise D has been destroyed whilst Picard was off the ship. Let's not forget that. And he would have been court-martialed because he lost the Federation flagship to a 20-year-old bird of prey that was out of date that it should not have been lost to. For further evidence, see the Plinkett video. So, if Picard was a better people manager, the Enterprise D probably wouldn't have been destroyed, okay? So, let's start with the worst offender of them all, right? Commander William Riker, all right? So, as we know, Picard's first officer, Riker, turns up in Encounter at Farpoint and he's not done his homework. Right, he has no idea who his captain is or who the other senior officers are. He is surprised to see Councillor Troy, right? If this guy had even bothered to do any research on his new post, he would have been fully aware that Councillor Troy would have been there, right? But no, she walks out of the turbo lift and he's like, oh my God, what's happening? Why is she here? Right? Because this guy just hasn't bothered to do any work, right? Riker is really cocky when he first comes on the Enterprise. So it's a bad start. Towards the end of season 1, we see the episode The Neutral Zone, right? It's the one where they find the 20th century people in the satellite thing. And Picard's off the ship for some reason. He's gone to some conference or other, probably to talk about the Romulans, right? And Riker's in command of the Enterprise. And they find this thing floating in space. And Data wants to go and take a look. Right, and Riker's instinct is like, nah, it's fine, it's going to fly into a sun, it'll be destroyed, it's okay. But Data says, no, I want to go. So Riker lets him go. And Data brings back the frozen people, right, who are nothing but trouble to everyone. Right, the one guy, the banker guy, even manages to get on the bridge and almost starts a war with the Romulans, right? That's all Riker's fault because he doesn't think things through. I mean, why did they have to defrost them? Why couldn't they have just put them in 24th century stasis and thought, we'll sort that out later, that's clearly not our problem? No, because Riker's an idiot. It gets worse. Into the second season, we get the episode Samaritan Snare, right? The one with the Packlids, okay? When they're on about making things go. And they've got a problem with their engines, okay? So Riker beams over Geordi. Now, we all hate Geordi, that's fine, but Troy comes up to the bridge, right, and they've got the Skype call on the view screen with Geordi, and Troy's like, I've got a really bad feeling about this. This is not good. Like, Geordi's in danger. Bear in mind, right, Troy reads minds, okay? Her spidey sense is tingling. And Riker's like, what do you know? Like, so what? Like, and so he calls Geordi and he says, hey, are you in danger? And LaForge is like, no, I'm fine. These guys are idiots, right? And then, of course, as we know, later on, the Pakled start shooting Geordi repeatedly with a phaser. Now, as happy as that makes me, that they keep shooting Geordi with the phaser repeatedly, again, this is another example of Riker's command incompetence. Okay, Picard's off the ship, and so just everything goes to pot. Peak performance, again, towards the end of Season 2, one of the better episodes of Season 2, actually, where Riker's given command of the Hathaway. Okay, Captain Riker's never lost. Ugh. Now, all right, this isn't an example of where Riker's in Picard's place. He's not in command of the Enterprise, right? But he's in command of his own ship. And he shows an inability to follow the rules, right? He cheats. Okay, he lets Wesley beam back for the antimatter that they use for their warp jump. He gets Worf to put in his login details on the Enterprise so that they can convince the Enterprise that there's a Romulan ship approaching, which basically creates the entire situation that follows, right? Because the Ferengi ship turns up, captained by Captain Quark, right, and attacks the Enterprise. And Picard is caught off guard because Riker has already cheated once in this simulation. So that then cripples the Federation flagship, right? Riker has put 1,014 people at risk, including women and children, because he wanted to win a war game situation, right? So the entire situation is created by Riker and his inability to do things properly. And as usual, it's up to Data to save the day. Data's the one that comes up with the plan to do the Hathaway warp jump and make it look like they've destroyed the Ferengi ship. Right, that's entirely Riker's fault, and it's because he's left on his own, to his own devices. This is what happens. Things go to pot when Riker is in charge. Next, of course, then we have one of the most famous examples of Riker being in command, where he's actually made captain of the Enterprise in Best of Both Worlds. And he is told that Captain Picard has been briefed on everything they're planning to do. He fires the deflector beam weapon, the famous, Mr. Worf, fire. That bit with the thing. And that's an epic fail. Like, they fire the beam, nothing happens, right? Locutus basically shrugs and says, yeah, nice one. Number one, you've no idea what you're doing, you idiot. It's up to Guinan to tell Riker what he's done wrong. Frickin' Guinan! She's not even in Starfleet. She's just the lady who works in the bar. And she's the one that has to say to Riker, oh, by the way, you've no idea what you're doing. The Borg know everything Picard knows now, so you've got to be unpredictable, you stupid bearded muppet. And again, it's up to Data to save the day. So, because of Riker's inability to let Picard go, which is something Guinan actually says to him, she says, you have got to let Picard go. You have got to forget him. This is immediately after Riker's gone in the ready room and looked wistfully at Picard's empty chair and said, what would you do? Like, Captain Picard is Commander Riker's work dad. We all know that Riker has got father issues, so he just replaces his dad with Captain Picard. It's dangerous. He could have got the entire Federation assimilated. Thank God for Data, right? Because when Data's plugged in to Captain Picard's brain, when he's in the lab, Riker's immediate last order before Data says, "Oi, stand by." Riker says to Wesley, ready a collision course. He's about to ram the Federation flagship into a Borg cube. 1,000 people, including small children. He makes no effort to save those kids. It's just like, Wesley, warp 9 into the side of that Borg ship. We're going to blow them up if I have to kill all the kids. People go on about Anakin Skywalker murdering younglings in episode 3. Riker was about to kill 1,000 people, including younglings, just because he'd run out of ideas. Thank God for Data. Yet again, Data saves Riker's ass. Moving on, we then have Redemption 2, the Klingon Civil War episode. Riker again is given a ship, the Excalibur, and all he does is just what Picard tells him. He doesn't think for himself at all in that episode. He just does exactly what Picard tells him. He contributes nothing to the mission. And the best of it is, right, Sela doesn't even consider Riker to be a threat. Okay, they're talking about firing their anti-proton thing at the detection grid, and Sela says to her aide, she says, no, target the ship with the android captain, because she knows, even Sela knows, even the Romulans know that Riker is useless. This Data is the one who is the threat tactically. He's not even important enough to be targeted by the Romulans. That's how useless Riker is. Okay? One of the worst defending episodes here, of course, is Chain of Command with Captain Jellicoe. And again, you need to see the Steve Shives video for a detailed explanation of this, but I'm just quickly going to summarise, right? Jellicoe comes on board. He gives Riker an order. He says, you need to change the shift pattern, right? And Riker just basically says, no, I can't. It's impossible. I'm not doing it. It'll not work. No. And then he sulks. He's just miserable for the next few days because his work dad is off on another mission. And he's useless to Jellicoe. The only crew member to efficiently do his job in that episode, again, surprise, surprise, is Data. And he gives him a red uniform as a reward. Data should have been made first officer and Riker should have been sent to Rurapente after that scenario, right? Or maybe the same prison that Tom Paris was in. That'd have been good, wouldn't it? That'd have been a great spin-off. Riker and Paris in chains. I'd have watched it. Anyway, it'd have been more compelling than Discovery. Oh, I almost got all the way through without having a dig at Discovery. Never mind, it's fine. Moving on. We get to Unification Part 2. Right? Again, Picard's off the ship. He's on Romulus trying to convince Spock not to defect or whatever. And there's that dark, foreboding-looking ship, right? The one that's replaced the T'Pau. The T'Pau is missing. And this evil-looking black ship turns up, right? And there's probably people on board that ship with information, which turns out, if they're the ones that have been taking those deflector dishes or whatever and giving them to the Romulans so they can build those Vulcan ships to fool everyone, the people on that big black ship probably had useful information. So rather than trying to talk to them, Riker just says to Worf, just start shooting at him, whatever. And again, it's a lucky shot and the ship explodes. He kills several crewmen and he only knows what to do in that situation because Picard tells him what to do throughout that episode. Again, he's just... The guy is dangerously unqualified. But I don't really think it's Riker's fault. I think it's Picard's fault because he never bothers to train him. Again, we see in the episode Rascals, the one where Picard and Keiko and Ro get, and Guinan, they get their ages reversed and they become kids. Riker's in command, and Ferengi commandeer the Enterprise, the Ferengi. I mean, even Odo brings this up later in Deep Space Nine to ridicule Worf. When Worf's saying, the security on this station is dreadful and it wouldn't happen on the Enterprise, right? And Odo says, really? And then he gets out his little pad and he starts saying, the Ferengi commandeered the Enterprise. So, and who was in charge of security on the Enterprise, Worf? Oh, that's right, you were. But that's what happens when you leave Riker in charge, right? The Ferengi are able to take over the ship. It's a good job they didn't decide to open a bar. Well, there already was a bar. There was 10 Forward. So, yeah. And probably one of the worst episodes of Riker falling apart without his work dad is the episode Gambit. Or the two-parter Gambit, where they think Picard's been killed, right? These witnesses say he was vaporised on the planet's surface, and it wasn't vaporised. The weapon was actually a transporter. So it looked like he was vaporised. And Riker literally falls to bits. He's just inconsolable without Picard. Deanna comes to see him and she's like, look, everyone's upset. It's not just you. And then he loses his temper and he shouts at her and probably uses some racial slurs because she's half Betazoid, right? That's probably not true. I don't think he does use any racial slurs, but it doesn't matter. The point is that he yells at Deanna and all she's trying to do is say, stop being so selfish. And get back to work because we've all got jobs to do. But then, later on, Riker ends up being captured by the same people that captured Picard. That's how useless he is without his work dad, right? Picard's off the ship, Riker falls to pieces and ends up being kidnapped. And of course, moving on to the big screen. In Generations, alright, Picard's off the ship, he's talking about the Borg and time and stuff with Soren. Riker's in command, and he loses a fight to a 20-year-old Klingon bird of prey, and crashes the Federation flagship into a planet. And he avoids jail. He's not in prison for that, and nobody knows why. This pattern is also repeated on the Enterprise E as well. Picard's on the planet trying to free the Baku, and Riker, he goes off and he fights the Sona ships, and then he comes back and he only beams Picard off the collector. He leaves Ruafo there. Ruafo is blown up. Riker doesn't know what's going on. He hasn't asked Picard. He hasn't said, do you want me to beam back Ruafo, or do you want me to leave him where he is? Mr. Plinkett talks about this in much more detail than I'm going to do here, but Plinkett's right. Like, Riker has got no idea what is going on at that point in the film. And the only other notable thing that Riker does in Insurrection is he shaves his beard, or rather, he has a bath with Troy, and she shaves his beard off. And everyone's like, why? Oh, that's right, because later on he can make the joke about being smooth as an android's bottom to Data, and everybody laughed. The man is dangerously unqualified. If I was posted to the USS Titan, I would be terrified. I would be absolutely terrified to serve under this man. He has no idea what he is doing without Picard being there. So that's Commander Riker. Next up is Dr. Beverly Crusher. Alright, Picard's on-off love interest. Okay. And we see Beverly in command in the episode Descent, the one where they find the Borg that have been co-opted by Lore. Right, Lore has managed to convince a load of Borg to follow him. Right, and it's the ship, they sent Hugh back to a Borg ship, and they all became disconnected from the collective. So, Picard beams down to the planet with most of the crew of the Federation flagship to look for Data. Which makes sense, because Data's probably like his best officer. He's the only one with any worth. And he leaves Beverly in command, right? And he says, if the Borg show up, get back to the conduit and get back to the Alpha Quadrant and be safe, because there's kids on the ship. Beverly's like, nah, sack that off, pal. I'm going to beam people up off the planet's surface. And then she flies the Federation flagship into a sun, using only experimental shield technology that she only found out about like 6 months previously. There's kids on board, Bev. You've got a child yourself. Do you not have any empathy with any other parents on board, right? No. So everyone manages to avoid death by flying into a sun. She then destroys the Borg ship, right? Like, flat out destroys it. Now, that thing's massive. It's at least as big as a Borg cube. And we reckon that the drones on that planet came from a Borg cube. And Borg cubes have got like 10,000 drones on them. I'm sure there's a number given in Voyager for how many drones are on a cube, right? But we can assume a lot of those drones are on that ship. And these are liberated drones. They're not part of the Borg collective. They've been freed. They could have been individuals again. They could have had their identities reasserted. But no, Beverly comes up with it's not even her, it's the little ensign girl who says, I did my thesis on shooting phaser beams into stars to create solar flares, and she murders hundreds of thousands of Borg drones. Like, thanks, Bev. First do no harm, right? Some doctor. And of course you get, that same young science officer and then the guy at Tactical, and they're just bickering, and he's like, well, I better make sure that my calculations are correct, Ensign. And it's like, okay, do they not have any sense of decorum? Like, why can't they behave like trained Starfleet officers? But no. And of course, this is really the only time we properly see Beverly in command until we get to the Ghost of Christmas Future in All Good Things, where she's now captain of the Pasteur. And what happens? Picard comes on board and says, we're going on another mission. And because Beverly is one of Picard's officers, she goes, okay, no problem, let's do that. And her ship gets destroyed because she did what Picard told her to do. That is the problem. They revere Picard so much that he comes aboard and says, I want to go to the Devron system, Beverly. And so that's what they do. So Beverly takes... I mean, she actually says, we have very little offensive capability, right? This is a medical ship. We can't go up against the Klingons. But she does anyway. Thank God that Riker was keeping tabs on his former work dad and was stalking him on the Enterprise, right? Couldn't have shown up 10 minutes earlier, eh? Well, before the Pastor was destroyed. Whatever, doesn't matter. This is the problem. So that's Beverly. Next up, we have Counselor Troi. Counselor Troi. Now, this is the example of where Picard is... He's not off the ship, he's just off the bridge. He's just out of sight, right? This is how bad Picard's command crew is. He just has to not be in the room for things to start going wrong. And this is the episode Disaster, right? The Enterprise hits a space wall or something. A quantum filament or something, right? And everything goes offline. It's the one where Keiko has the baby. She has Molly. And Worf delivers her, and it's referred to later in Deep Space Nine. And Worf says, when Keiko's about to have her second child, and Worf's like, oh, no, I'm not going to be on the ship. I'm going to be on Earth visiting my parents. I'm not going to be here. No, leave me alone. So basically, Troi is in command because Picard is showing kids around, right? There's a theme with kids and danger on the Enterprise, right? You don't have a very long life expectancy if you're a child on the Enterprise D. But Counselor Troi is in command, thanks to Chief O'Brien, right? Chief O'Brien says, well, actually, because Ensign Ro is like, I really ought to take charge here. And Chief O'Brien is like, well, actually, the lady who can't even be bothered to put on a uniform every day actually holds the rank of Lieutenant Commander. And everyone's like, what? Why? So... Troi is in command. She's no idea what she's doing. But she's got Ensign Ro, okay, who survived the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, managed to get off the planet and into Starfleet. And she's got Chief O'Brien. Chief O'Brien is widely regarded in Next Generation as being like this really experienced guy, okay? Captain Maxwell says that he is this great tactical officer. He's like a really good tactician. Picard in Redemption even uses him as his tactical officer. It's referenced a few times in Deep Space Nine that Chief O'Brien's basically a war hero, right? So you've got two really useful people there. If you've got no idea what you're doing, Chief O'Brien and Ensign Ro are two of the better equipped people on the Enterprise to advise you. Only Troi doesn't do that. She ignores everyone. She doesn't separate the ship because she's convinced that people are alive, even though she has no evidence other than her spidey sense. The containment system nearly fails, and everyone on the ship, including kids, almost dies, right? Because she wants to keep the Enterprise in one piece, because that's what Picard would do, right? Ensign Ro and Chief O'Brien yell at each other like they have no sense of decorum, and this is a trend we've seen. The science officer Ensign and the guy who went on to be future guy in Enterprise bickering when Beverly is in charge as though they have no sense of decorum. Same thing happens. Picard's not there. Everyone loses their sense of decorum. And once again, the day is saved by Data. Troi doesn't actually do anything other than tell Ensign Ro and Chief O'Brien that she's not going to do what they suggest, for no logical reason. I mean, and this is someone who is so inexperienced that Chief O'Brien is trying to explain to her what's happened. He says, we've hit a quantum filament. And she's like, oh, so is that like a cosmic string? Because that's a thing she's heard of. And O'Brien's like, no, it's nothing like a cosmic string. How do you and me work on the same ship? I'm stuck working the teleporter, and you're up here advising Picard on what to do when, like, Romulans attack and stuff. Anyway, and this is only because, Picard is still on the ship. He's just not on the bridge. So the minute Picard goes into his ready room or the turbo lift, I'd be very worried. So that's Counselor Troi. Fortunately, she doesn't manage to get everyone killed. But, happy ending, she later crashes the Federation flagship into a planet. because they let her drive. And Riker doesn't think to say to Deanna, I tell you what, let's get someone who's actually qualified to fly this thing. So, finally, we come to Commander Data, right? I've referenced Data several times here, and we're going to talk about Data. Now, this is where this video is going to take a slight left turn, okay? Because up until now, I have focused on how useless everyone has been. And yeah, Commander Riker, terrible. Dr. Crusher, terrible. Councillor Troy, beyond terrible. However, things are slightly different when it comes to Data, right? When we look at the episode Night Terrors, right, the one where it's going, eyes in the dark, roar, and everyone can't get to, it's a bad one. It's a really boring episode. They find the Britain, and everyone's gone nuts because they couldn't get into RNA sleep, so they start murdering each other, right? And it turns out it's some aliens that are stuck in a thing with a pulsar or whatever. Anyway, fortunately, Data is there, right? Picard is incapacitated because he's exhausted, so Data is left in command, and he manages to save the ship. Thank God for that, right? And he orders Picard to bed, which is just the best idea ever. Like, you get off the bridge, leave things to me. In the episode Redemption, which I've already talked about in terms of Commander Riker, Data is given command of the USS Sutherland, a command that he has to ask for because Picard is racist against androids. Picard didn't want to give Data command of a ship. Data had to beg for it, right? So he goes to the Sutherland and he disobeys Picard's orders. He thinks for himself. He sees a pattern. He realises that he can expose the Romulan treachery. And that's what he does. He saves the day yet again, right? He exposes the Romulans helping the Duras to win the Klingon Civil War. Data should have been promoted. They should have given him the Sutherland. Hell, they should have given him the Enterprise after that, right? At the very least, they should have given him command of the Sutherland. In fact, they would have been daft not to give him the Sutherland. In that same episode, Picard says there is a lack of experienced command-level officers to put together this fleet. They needed a captain for the Sutherland. Why wouldn't they give it to Data? It doesn't make any sense from an in-universe perspective. And the fact that Data didn't get promoted to executive officer until Nemesis, which is like 10 years after the episode Redemption, it's just insulting. It's just unfair to Data. And it's just insulting against common sense as well. Right? Data was a better officer than Riker, Troy and Crusher combined. Similarly, in Chain of Command Part 2, we see Data promoted to executive officer, right? Whilst Jellicoe's in command. Data is the only one who efficiently carries out Jellicoe's orders. Because Data doesn't have that chip on his shoulder. No pun intended. Because he's a computer chip. Doesn't matter. Data doesn't see Picard as his work dad, like Riker does. Like, Data can literally just switch off from it, and so he just does what Jellicoe tells him. Well. Later on in the episode Gambit, so after Riker's had his emotional breakdown, right, he gets captured, as we know, and then Data is left in command, okay? He figures out what's happened. He figures out that Picard is, working with these pirates, and he lets him go. He doesn't shoot him or whatever, and he doesn't out him when they beam into the conference lounges and say, oh my god, Captain Picard, you're alive, so that they all know. Worf's behaviour goes to pot. He has to pull Worf into his ready room and say, could you start behaving like a Starfleet officer, please, and not a child? Because again, Picard is off the ship, so Worf behaves like he has no decorum. Decorum leaves the ship with the captain, it seems. And then at the end of the episode, right, Data says, well, actually, to Riker, he says, actually, you've committed acts of, crime against the Federation. You deserve to be in a prison. And so he escorts him away, and Riker's like, come on, Data, he was joking. And Data's like, no, I'm not screwing around. You're going to jail for a long time, pal. Unfortunately, he didn't, and we never got to see the spin-off of Riker and Paris in chains. That would have been great. Anyway, Finally, of course, we get to Star Trek Nemesis, right? Data is left in command of the bridge when Picard beams over to fight with Shinzon. Again, see the Plinkett analysis for why that is the stupidest thing ever. But what does Data do? Does he just follow Picard's orders and try and reverse away from the scimitar whilst Shinzon is charging up his death ray? No. He says to Geordi, right, I'm going over there. And he flies through space on his own, doesn't transport, he goes through space himself, right? Rescues Picard from his own stupid decision and saves the day by sacrificing himself, right? Data is bizarrely, despite the fact that Picard is his commanding officer, Data manages to actually show like personal growth. Data manages to succeed without Picard's help. The problem is Picard can't handle change, so Data never gets promoted. He never gets the promotion that he deserved, and it's just unfair. So, to conclude, I think Picard has anemotic syndrome. And I know that it's shown in All Good Things as it coming on, but I think Picard's had anemotic syndrome since 2364. He can't handle change. I think the guy is senile. I think he can't remember what time frame he's in. It's like Groundhog Day for Picard. He keeps getting up and realises that he doesn't know what day of the week it is. But fortunately, all of his senior staff, all exist in the same jobs. He's got that routine. He's got people all in the same place at the same time. So he can rely on that. It doesn't matter that he's no idea what day it is. He knows that all his people are where he put them. And that ensures his captaincy, right? So the sad thing is, right, he took several highly qualified officers down with him in his descent into senility. Because, Data is the prime example, right? It's just not fair that Data didn't get promoted. Riker, he didn't deserve it. He didn't. I think Riker just thought he was going to inherit the Enterprise from Picard at some point. Whereas Data should have had his own ship at least twice over the course of Next Generation. But you compare Next Gen to Deep Space Nine. Like I said, everyone who worked on Deep Space Nine got a promotion. Or they had good career prospects, right? Look at the end of the series. O'Brien is given a job as a professor at Starfleet Academy, right? Worf is made ambassador to Kronos. Okay, alright, so he doesn't actually get promoted. He gets promoted in Generations. It's one of the rare occasions where a Next Generation crew member actually gets a promotion. And okay, yeah, Geordi gets promoted a couple of times. Troy gets promoted by... she goes on the holodeck and she has to kill Geordi. Way. But that's not through Picard's doing, Whereas on Deep Space Nine, everyone gets promoted. They have great career prospects. Even Nog, he gets promoted to lieutenant at the end of the show. It's like one of Sisko's last official acts. Kira gets promoted from major to colonel. If you wanted, one, to stay alive, and two, to get promoted and have good career prospects in the 24th century, Deep Space Nine was the place to be. You should have gone to Deep Space Nine. Next Gen, you're going to be a lieutenant commander for 15 years. Voyager, you're going to be an ensign for 7 years. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Harry Kim. Right? Deep Space Nine was the place to be. And that is why I love Deep Space Nine. So I hope you enjoyed my little analysis. I hope that it gave you pause for thought. If you agree, feel free to tell me in the comments. If you don't agree, feel free to tell me that in the comments too. But what you have to remember is, whether you agree or not, it doesn't matter, because I'm a video. I don't care what you think, because I'm a video. I exist separate to reality. So it doesn't matter. But I hope you enjoyed it anyway. I hope your life has been enriched as a result of this, and maybe it'll make you watch Next Gen in a slightly different way. So, I hope you enjoyed it. Live long and prosper.